be talking about sweet potato production and the Adventist advantage. So I'll give you a few minutes to find a seat, and then we'll open with prayer. But before I do, when you think of the Adventist advantage, what do you think of? Ellen White? Okay. What else do you think of when you think of the Adventist advantage? Sorry? The day of rest? Yes. Anything else that might be related to what we eat? Health. Yes, that's right. Well, let's have a word of prayer and then we'll jump into it. Dear loving Father in heaven, thank you so much for what we are learning and being inspired with here at this conference. Thank you for leading us into this path that has so many benefits to us in every facet of our lives. And Father, as we spend this time now discussing sweet potatoes, I pray, Father, that you will help me to present it in the detail that will be helpful, as well as help each one know if this is something that will work for them on their farm or garden. And we pray for your blessing in Jesus' name, amen. So, sweet potato production and the Adventist advantage. When we think about the Adventist advantage, we think of the health message. If you were to Google Adventist advantage, you would come up with a bunch of articles about the longevity of Adventists and the health principles and so forth. And you're probably wondering, well, what does that have to do with sweet potatoes? Well, you will find out as we get into it. But as we grow and promote sweet potatoes, it's part of promoting the health message. And it goes really hand in hand, and it provides excellent witnessing opportunities and the ability to help people, many of whom are struggling with health issues. Sweet potatoes, let's talk about the properties of them a little bit. Sweet potatoes, by some authorities, many of them, are rated as the best vegetable that you can eat. They're loaded with carotenoids, vitamin C, potassium and fiber, and many other minerals and beneficial elements. The skin has as much antioxidants as blueberries and 3 times the nutrients of the flesh. So don't peel your sweet potatoes. Buy organic ones that have not been sprayed with a fungicide. The conventionally grown ones, if you can go on and watch on YouTube how they pack them in the packing sheds. Just before they drop into the box, they are sprayed with a fungicide to give them a longer shelf life. I don't know how good that is for you, but I would prefer not to be consuming that. The sweet potato can absorb up to 62 minerals if they're present in the soil, and that's more than 3 times most produce that we eat. So they are packed with nutrients. They're so good that NASA sends sweet potato with their astronauts up into space because they know it's going to provide them with nutrition. Sweet potatoes have an anti-cancer protein called sporamin. It's 80% of its total protein, and it's so powerful against cancer that a person with tongue cancer that eats regularly the sweet potato, it's like a chemo treatment on the cancer, that the cancer will actually go into remission from just eating the sweet potato. Studies have been done. If you want to learn more about that, if you go to nutritionfacts.org, Dr. Greger has a presentation on it there, and very amazing. And more than just tongue cancer, the protein can be absorbed into our blood, and apparently there's studies out there that are quite amazing as far as what it can do. The leaves, if you grow them, you can eat the leaves. And I'll just read to you what I read in this particular article. It was a posting on Facebook, but it did have a reference to a PubMed study, and I went there and read a lot of the language was over my head, but this is what the posting said. Sweet potato leaves kill 94% of prostate cancer cells in vitro. An extract of sweet potato leaves was discovered to be extremely toxic to prostate cancer cells in a study, killing 94% of them. and slowing the growth of prostate tumors in mice by 75%. Other research has shown that these super greens are also active against breast cancer, lung cancer, colon cancer, stomach cancer, and leukemia. And the health benefits of these greens are not just for the lab. One study out of Taiwan showed that eating at least 100 grams per week of this super vegetable decreased lung cancer risk by up to 57%. In other studies, sweet potato leaves boosted immunity in humans and lowered blood sugar in mice with type 2 diabetes. And if you need an energy boost, sweet potato leaf could be just the vegetable for you. A recent study showed it significantly relieved fatigue in mice, increased exercise capacity, and even boosted muscle glycogen levels. Why are these greens so powerful? They are an excellent source of potent antioxidants called polyphenols, including the unique and powerful, not sure if I can pronounce that word, but you can read it, and anti-cancer peptides. And alkaline diet fans, take note, these greens are one of the most alkalizing vegetables out there, delivering 400% the alkalizing power of pure lemon juice ounce for ounce. So maybe instead of wheatgrass, we should be out there juicing sweet potato leaves. So I come from Weimar Institute, where we have the college and the academy, and it is a really good fit for us with a school program that is totally out of sync with our growing season. So we plant them before school gets out. So we plant in May, and then through the summertime we just water and weed, keep them growing. And when school comes back into session again, then we harvest. Usually we start in October. We could possibly start in September, but giving them more time is beneficial to getting them to a larger size. We store them, we wash, pack, and ship them during the winter, and we use student labor for that. It provides excellent work experience for unskilled students. You know, when you bring students onto the farm, there's not a lot that they can do without doing a lot of damage or needing a lot of time and mentoring. But with sweet potatoes, you can put them to work and it's beneficial. There's minimal damage and loss occurred by their careless handling compared with other crops. They can do a lot of damage. In fact, I heard from one farm manager says students kill plants. So they can be a little hazardous when they're learning. But we have elementary kids come out and they have fun picking up the sweet potatoes and helping out. And yeah, it's a good fit for a school. But I will say this, the further north you go, the less viable sweet potatoes are, because you need a nice warm growing season. I have read that some people in Canada are growing them, and they start them under plastic, but they probably don't get very big, is my guess. But I read this in one article that sweet potatoes are a marketer's dream commodity, because as with blueberries and strawberries, demand keeps increasing despite harsh economic times. And I have found that to be true. We've been growing them for 4 years, and each year we sell more of them, and we're not really pushing them hard, and we're selling out a lot sooner every year. So, and I'll share with you a little bit about the growing method. If you have better tasting ones, they sell real well, and the demand increases from that. So it provides off-season income. This is a real bonus for farms, because most of your income comes in through the short summer months, starting maybe July, when at the peak of the season, and then tapers off, and by September, and when October comes, your income's almost completed, and that's when sweet potatoes kick in. In fact, when the weather starts getting cold, people start buying more sweet potatoes. It's a cold weather crop. They like to eat them hot, and especially the holiday season, Thanksgiving, the sales just go through the roof. We probably sell 3 or 4 times as many a couple of weeks before Thanksgiving than a normal week. So, and Christmas is higher too. So it boosts your income when you normally wouldn't have an income. So getting started with this crop, the source of wisdom. You want to learn how to farm? Go to the source, go to the originator, the creator. This particular passage, when I started farming, I claimed this promise that is contained in this particular passage. And I'll read it to you. It says, "Give ear and hear my voice, listen and hear my speech. Does the plowman keep plowing all day to sow? Does he keep turning his soil and breaking the clods? When he has leveled its surface, does he not sow the black cumin and scatter the cumin, plant the wheat in rows, the barley in the appointed place, and the spelt in its place? For he instructs him in right judgment. His God teaches him." Do you think he's interested in teaching us today? Very much so. "For the black cumin is not threshed with a threshing sledge, nor is a cartwheel rolled over the cumin, but the black cumin is beaten out with a stick and the cumin with a rod. Bread flour must be ground, therefore he does not thresh it forever, break it with his cartwheel, or crush it with his horsemen. This also comes from the Lord of hosts, who is wonderful in counsel and excellent in guidance." So I would claim this promise from the Lord and ask him to teach me. And it's amazing how the Lord brought into my life mentors who, with experience, that got me on the right track from the beginning. I still made mistakes and I still had to learn the hard way from some things, but I think I was given definitely an advantage from just those providences that came into my life. In the book Education 111, we are told, "In the cultivation of the soil, the thoughtful worker will find that treasures little dreamed of are opening up before him. No one can succeed in agriculture or gardening without attention to the laws involved. The special needs of every variety of plant must be studied. Different varieties require different soil and cultivation, and compliance with the laws governing each is the condition of success." So we want success, we must study and know what the plant needs are and what are the conditions for success. Sweet potato rarely flower. They don't put out many flowers. In fact, I have discovered that they typically flower when they have too much water. That's when the flowers seem to appear. But they don't really reproduce through the flower. And they don't produce, a seed like that. I've read a little bit about how they do cross varieties and come up with new varieties, and it's not very easily replicated. So how do we reproduce sweet potatoes? How do we come up with seed for planting? You can see in this picture here inside our high tunnel, you see where those hoops are in the raised bed. What you can actually do is set up, probably before you put in the soil, you get your sweet potatoes and you lay them in a layer on the ground, maybe give them about half an inch gap between, but you can crowd them together, completely cover the width of the bed and as long as you want. We had there about 10 feet and about 4 foot wide, and from that we got enough slips to plant out about at a guess, I think it was probably about 15,000 square feet. So you can grow a lot of plants in a very small area. Now, when you put them close together like that, we start them on the 1st of March, and spring it's just barely starting to, the days are getting a little bit longer, and it's barely starting to get slightly warmer. But we start them the 1st of March, and those hoops that are over there, we actually started them there before we actually put our plastic over the high tunnel. So we just had plastic over, like a low tunnel over them, so that the sun would heat them up, and then completely seal it around. We've got drip tape in there so that they get watered, and then they, with the sun shining in and getting hot inside there, in about just a little over 2 weeks, they start sprouting and coming through the mix. And the mix that we have in there is a compost sand mix. You can do it with straight sand. I've seen the commercial growers just use straight sand. I like to have a little bit of nutrition in there, and I find the slips grow a little bit faster. Some varieties grow really fast. The most popular variety that we sell is the slowest growing one. So they need a little bit more stimulus to get them growing. They grow up thick and close together, so when you cut your slips, and when I talk about a slip, that's the plant that you're gonna put in the ground, and the slip is all it is a piece of the vine. Some people think that sweet potatoes are like regular potatoes and they have eyes and you cut them in pieces and plant them in the ground. No, you don't do that. When you cut them, they're probably going to go rotten. So the slips are the vine, and with them crowded together, instead of them creeping horizontally and going out that direction, they go vertical because there's no place for them to go except up, which is really handy because then you can grab a whole handful of them, and with a sharp knife, we use one of those hook type of knives, serrated knives, grab it, and then just you can cut a whole handful. And in the front of that picture there, you can see it's actually a plastic tote full of them. And we'll put in about a couple of inches of water in the bottom of that tote and then just cram it full, and we can fit about 1,000 slips into that one little tote, and then we take it out into the field to plant. Yes? No roots. You don't need roots. These things are amazing. In fact, how many of you have had to wrestle with quack grass and Bermuda grass and all that type of thing? And what happens with them if you don't get rid of it and it just lies around, or it lies on the surface? It just puts down roots, doesn't it? And it spreads like crazy. Well, sweet potato is a little bit like that. Those vines, once they're in contact with the soil and moisture, they put out roots, and they get established quite fast. I like to cut them and get them in the field the same day and within a few hours because they rebound so fast. But you can keep them in that plastic tub for probably up to 2 weeks to a month, depending on the temperature that you're keeping them in, and plant them, and they still will grow. They're very hardy. So, yes, a question. Yeah. 50-50 mix, sand and compost. And then I add a little bit of 711, which has a bit of nitrogen in there as well, about probably 1 in 30 mix. We buy ours. We to make the volume of compost that you need on a farm is a lot of work, and we can buy a semi-truckload that has 40,000 pounds for about $700 or $800 delivered. So the amount of work you have to put in to produce that would, if you looked at the time you put into it, it would probably, the return on your time would be maybe $1 an hour. So, yes. Okay. So basically, when you have your raised bed, our raised bed is about 6 inches. So we put the sweet potato in there and probably cover them with about 1 inch of the soil mix above that. Now, if you're a home grower, how many of you are here are home growers and want to know how to do it at home? Okay, let me tell you how to do it at home. Just get yourself a 3 or 4 gallon pot and put your mix of soil in that, but don't fill it to the top. Maybe fill it to about 8 inches from the top. Put your sweet potato, you can put 1 or 2 in the top there, and then cover it with 1/2 inch to 1 inch above that, and then take a piece of clear plastic, a plastic bag, put it over the top, put a string or something elastic around there, and keep it inside your home where the temperature is 70 or above. Because when you start these, the temperatures outside may be, in the 50s, and they're not going to sprout at that temperature. So, yeah, moisten it. Yeah, make it moist. Yes. One sweet potato, the larger the sweet potato, probably the more slips that you'll get. And I would suggest buying organic ones to grow your plants from, because the antifungal sprays, I have heard that they can spray also with a anti-sprouting mix as well. So I don't know if they all do that, but if you buy an organic sweet potato, it's not going to have the spray on it that's going to retard the sprouting. But so then put them in the bed, put them in your pot, cover them, put the plastic over, and inside the house, and in about 2 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, you'll see the sprouts coming up. And when they grow up and hit the plastic at the top, then pull the plastic off, put them in a window where they get the sun coming in, probably the morning sun, and if you don't mind leaving it inside, they will continue to grow there. They don't have to have sun all day. If it's in a window that gets the sun in the morning, that will be sufficient. Keep it moist, and they will grow out long vines. And by May, we plant out in May, but wherever you're living, you want to know when your last frost date is so that you know when to plant out. But they'll grow out, and sometimes those vines will grow out maybe 3 feet. Some varieties are faster than others. You could cut that into 3 or 4 slips to plant out. So we could get anywhere from a dozen slips off one sweet potato to 20 or 25 slips, depending on the variety and how fast they grow. It's very easy to do. And you'll be amazed at how easy they grow. But, the knowledge of growing these seems to be not out there. In our area, we had the Master Gardeners Club wanted us to teach them how to grow, even though, they're experts in growing a lot of other things. But a lot of people don't know how to grow them. So any more questions on, yes? Yes. Doesn't matter. You can plant it upside down. It will still grow. So they're amazing. So very easy, very, very easy to do. So once you've got your slips grown, the next step is to prepare your soil. Now, if you're growing them at home, what I've got here is a molder on the back of the rototiller. But at home, you can rototill your garden and then just take a rake and rake from both sides and make yourself a mound 8 to 10 inches deep. 8 inches is enough, just like that, a mound of dirt, and then you will plant them in the top. Now, like as I mentioned before, that sweet potato have the ability to absorb up to 62 minerals, and if they're in the soil. In our area, we have somewhere around 15 or 16 minerals in the soil, and so amending your soil is really, really important. We do a soil test and we see what's missing and follow the recommendations to put what's there. And we additionally use ocean minerals. They can be broadcast on the surface, but you want to look out for your sodium level on your soil test. If it's too high, don't use ocean minerals. Use azomite. Yes. No. Actually, it's interesting. We've got clay soil, and when I first started into it, I knew you could grow them in clay soil because I've seen it done in New Zealand. I talked to the UC Davis expert on sweet potato growing, and he said, well, if you're going to grow them in clay, you're probably going to need to add a lot of compost and soften up the soil and so on. Well, I didn't take his advice and went ahead and grew them. Our sweet potato grown in clay are a lot uglier than the ones grown in sand, but they're sure a lot more nutritious, and they use about 1/3 the water as the ones grown in sand. In California, that's significant where there's a water shortage. So when you're rototilling up your garden, it's not so important in a home garden where you're not planting a lot, but where we're planting several acres of it, we're planting them by hand in the soil. And if the soil is not fluffed up nice and light, if it's hard and still a little bit clumpy, your hand and your wrist gets really tired and sore planting them, because we plant sometimes over 50,000 of them, so it gets hard on you. So we rototill maybe 3 times to get it broken up nice and light, and then go over it with the molder, and the molder molds it up into a nice shape to plant into. And then once there's the picture of the molder. I just welded this up myself. It's a very simple, basically a box on the back of the rototiller that bolts on there, and then it just shapes to the shape that you want the beds to be. We did it at 30-inch centers because the wheel track of a lot of the tractors is 60-inch. So by doing it at 30-inch, you can fit 2 rows. The commercial growers do it at 40-inch, but they have tractors that are bigger and have a wider wheel base, so they probably can grow bigger sweet potatoes having that extra space. So if you're doing it at home and you want them to grow a bit bigger, you could space them more than 30 inches, maybe 36 or 40 inches apart. We notice on the edge rows that the edge rows are always bigger than the ones inside where they're a little bit more crowded. But anyway, this works. And so it's just basically, well, you can see from the picture there, you could probably have, if you can't weld, you can probably go to a shop and have them make it up. And I don't think it would cost too much money, maybe $500 or $600. I know it's a lot of money, but if you're going to do several acres, it's worth it. 10 gauge. Yeah. So here's a picture of our soil audit that was done and the recommendations of minerals that we needed to put on the field. And the most important mineral that they need is the sulfate. They hardly need any nitrogen. In fact, we grew them for probably 3 years without giving them any additional nitrogen. Our soil, from the soil audit, I think it had, 82 pounds per acre already available in the soil. You know, rain brings down some nitrogen and there's some there in the soil. So for the first few years I didn't add any, but the first 6 weeks of growth is vegetative growth. They're not putting on a sizable root. So by giving them a little bit of nitrogen, the recommendation is 120 pounds per acre, so it's only a little bit more than what's in the soil, but it'll allow them to grow the vines a little bit faster, and then you stop giving it to them, and then they concentrate on putting on the root. So I wouldn't worry about it too much in a home situation. For us, it speeds the process up a little bit. So then we get to the planting, and you can see these lads here that have some slips sitting there in their laps, and these guys got experienced at planting and got quite fast at it, and they wanted to go faster and faster to see how and I actually made a mistake of playing along with them, because afterwards I went back and some of the spacing, instead of being 12 inches or 8 inches apart, depending on the variety, they started, the spacing got a bit wider. But anyway, in this little video, you'll see them planting quite fast. They just stick them straight in the ground. There's a technique to it. You can't see it here. You'll see me doing it. You can kind of see me putting it in and tucking it backwards. So you want about 6 inches of the slip under the ground, and depending on the soil, if it's light, it's easy to put them in. If it's heavy, you've got to really push it down, to get it in there. When you're not experienced, what I see most people do is they push down, and they use a lot of strength to push down. When you get the technique, it's just, here's the surface of the soil, you're holding it like a pencil, and the tips of your finger just break the soil, and then you tuck it under. But you don't want it to be too close to the surface. You want it to have maybe 4 inches of soil above it, so it doesn't dry out too quickly. So you can see here, I should probably go back to the beginning. Well, you can't see what we're using for transplanting. I'll have to go through this again. The sled that they're on, actually, I just made this up out of water pipe. It was just old water pipe that we had there, and it's just bent 5 foot between the front and the back, and 5 foot wide, and then just put the places to attach to the 3-point linkage, and it just slides along the ground in between the rows. And we had some old thrown away chairs from the academy, and we just cut them up and welded them onto there, and that worked fine. So, and then we mounted our drip tape rolls on the back, because the first watering that they get is the most important water they get in the whole season. If you don't get water to them right away, they can start wilting, and they may survive, but if you get water to them right away, the roots start growing. If you leave them in water like a flower in a vase, you'll see in a few days they can put out 1/2 inch of roots just very, very fast. Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, ideally, when I've got 3 guys planting, I'll have one guy just hooking up water continually. So following immediately after they're in the ground, they're hooking up the drip tape. It's been rolled out. All they have to do is put an end on it and a connector into the manifold, connect it, and get water immediately. So they rebound much faster if you get water to them. If you drag a bit and they get half an hour of no water or an hour of no water, then you're going to see it could take them another week or so before you actually see them really starting to take off. If they're freshly cut and they're planted and get the water right away, in a week you can see them, they're starting to put growth on in that quickly. So the faster you get water, the better. Yeah. Yes, but they still won't rebound as fast. Yeah, when they're in the tote and left in there for a week, you'll pull them out and they'll have roots sticking out the side of them already. Well, they still take longer. I think it knocks them back, definitely knocks them back, even though they've got some roots on. Yes. Mm-hmm. And put them in the ground that way? No, we haven't done that. If you're doing it in a home situation, you can probably have a watering can and just put them in the ground and then just give them. They don't need it. In some areas where they don't use drip tape, like in New Zealand, no drip tape's used. They go over top with a water cart and they've got a 3/4 inch pipe that's been flattened a bit and it directs down on top of the top of the row, and they just drive along the rows with this water pouring out, and they don't get a lot of water, but they need to have moisture to get them started. Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. That'll work because it'll get the moisture and it'll make the hole for you. So, yeah, as long as they get the water, that's really, really important. Now, something else that we use, when we put the slips in the plastic tub, you don't have to do this. I don't know that I have really monitored it to see it makes a significant difference, but the mycorrhizae fungi, I bought the powder and mixed it in with the water that the slips are sitting in. So when we pull them out, they've been inoculated a little bit with it, and then we put them in the ground. Sometimes when I'm pulling the sweet potato out of the ground, I can see the white kind of spiderweb-looking mycorrhizae on them. I don't see it on them all, but I do believe it makes a difference. So for what it's worth, you may want to experiment with that. Let me skip over this slide here. We actually feed, I mentioned the nitrogen, but we actually feed to them additionally to what we put in the soil from the recommendations. They use a lot of potassium, and it's what makes them fat. If you don't feed them additional potassium, they're longer and more slender, as you can see. Well, I'll come to it. But we have also the ocean minerals system as well, and we've put maxi crop, which is a kelp extract that helps the rooting as well. And it's not necessary, but I like to try things to see if it makes a difference, and I think it does help speed them up a little bit. But the ocean minerals provide 90 minerals to them, and so they absorb that. And just without getting into too many details, when I started growing using ocean minerals, I didn't realize how powerful for our health it really is. I used to have seborrheic dermatitis, and the doctor said there's no cure. You just have to use this Nizoral shampoo to control it. and it was really a curse. I had it for nearly 30 years, and as soon as I started eating the food grown on ocean minerals, it cleared up, it went away. I've never had issues with it. So yeah, it's really, really good stuff. So this is sulfate of potash. That's what we use. We follow the recommendations. When you get your soil test, you want to be aiming for the top end of the scale. They have a range. They might recommend between 5 to 7.5% of your CEC to be potassium. Try to push it up to the 7% rather than staying down at the 5, because sweet potato like it. They'll use it all. And then we feed an additional 2 to 250 pounds per acre through the drip system after they've been planted, and it makes a difference, definitely makes a difference. You can see these sweet potato here. You see this thin, small ones compared with the fat ones. The thin ones are what they turn out like without the potassium, and it can make a difference of double the yield if you feed the potassium. So potassium is very, very expensive, but it repays many times over if you use it. Now, if you leave the sweet potato in the ground long enough, they get big. But here's the thing that happens. They're long and big. When you feed the potassium, they're short and fat. And customers like them short and fat. So if they're long and fat, they kind of, not so, yes. If the soil recommendations say it needs it, we put everything that the soil recommendation says. And then in addition to that, well, the first 6 weeks is the vegetative growth stage, so we don't give it to them during that stage. We give a little bit of nitrogen to them and a little bit of the kelp, and then once they've put on some nice tops, which they will have by 6 weeks' time, then we start feeding a little bit every week to them of the potassium sulfate through the rest of their life. It's actually interesting that the majority of their growth happens in the last month. A month before harvest, you dig around and have a look at them, and they're small, and you start worrying that they're not going to get big enough. But in that last month, they fatten up. It's amazing. The other thing is giving them adequate water, and it's going to vary depending on your soil type. Let me just mention about the water, and then I'll come to you. The water, initially, I followed recommendations from somebody who was growing them in an environment that got a bit of rain, and the ground moisture content was higher. And so I watered, and he said, be careful, don't give them too much water, and he told me how much to give them. So the first year I did that, and they ended up being longer and thinner because they go deeper to get the moisture. Whereas if you give them enough moisture, they don't have to go as deep, and they'll be shorter and fatter. So, but you don't want them to be too saturated with water. There's other issues that come from that as well. They won't actually get big if they have too much water. So you've got to have the right moisture. Yes, brother. No, it's not a chemical fertilizer as such. I guess technically it is, but it's a natural. It's OMRI listed. It's not harmful. It's not in a toxic level. I believe so. It comes from the product that we use comes from Utah, from the Salt Lakes somewhere there. It's 50%. Sorry. Yes, you can get it in a for broadcasting. You want to get a granular. They call it standard fines. It's like sand, and it broadcasts nicely from a spreader. For the drip tape, you can get the, what do they call it, ultra fine or something like that, and it's solution grade, and it's a white powder. It's very, very small particle size. So weeding is the next thing you're going to deal with. Yes. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll tell you what we do, and you're going to have to adapt to your soil type. But we have heavy clay soil, And if you have heavy clay soil, it holds the moisture a lot longer. And so we give them about 3 hours on the drip tape. Now, it depends on the spacing and rating of your drip tape and your supply line, if it's giving volume and so forth as far as. So you want to monitor. Don't go by, time. You want to be continually monitoring and feeling the moisture and making sure they're getting adequate moisture. We do about a 3-hour watering 3 times a week. And we use drip tape that has 8-inch spacing. Now, if you use drip tape that has 12-inch spacing, you probably need to do about 4.5 hours in our clay type of soil. If you're in sandy soil, in Livingston, California, where it's the sweet potato capital, they have it almost looks like beach sand. They give their sweet potatoes 6 hours a day, every day, because it just goes straight through. Just make sure that it doesn't dry out and it stays, moist enough that they're not going to go deep looking for water. First year, you're going to experiment and you'll learn from it. So you might make some mistakes the first year, but they're very, very hardy plants. You can give them, I told you that the first water is the most important water they get. If you didn't water them for the rest of the summer, they will stay alive and they'll grow a little bit. And you might even think that they're going to produce something. You probably dig them up and there might not be hardly anything there. But it's amazing. They are very, very hardy. They're not going to show you by their leaves that they need water. Most other plants will start wilting and drooping. They have to be almost completely dried out before the leaves start looking like they're drooping. So don't use the foliage as an indicator of water needs. This little video, we first started, everything was hand weeded. This mechanical weeder just uses some shovels on a toolbar and goes in between the rows. And if the ground is flat enough, it works really well because you can get the dirt piling up on top. Then after our students were grumbling and complaining about having to bend over and weed, one of them said, "Come on, let's make a thing we can lie down on and weed." And finally, he twisted my arm because I got tired of the complaining. And so we basically modified the transplanter so that they could lie down and weed. And it actually increased our efficiency from what used to take us 2 weeks by hand. We got done in about 3 days. So I was grateful. And they were much happier because they were... The thing with young people is they don't like to be more than a hand reach apart from each other. And so when they're in their rows, some of them are faster than others. But the fast ones, they wait for the slow ones because they don't want to be separated. So you slow the whole process down to the slowest one, whereas with this, the tractor sets the pace. They all work at the same speed, and they're chatting away, and they've got a weeder in both hands, and it's much better. So you can see on this particular terrace there, you can see in front of the tractor, the weeds are quite thick. We try to get to them before they get to this stage, but even if they get to this stage, you can go along and you can see behind there the weeds have been knocked back. Once the sweet potato put on their vines, they basically smother the weeds down. There'll be a few weeds that'll grow through, but we'll walk through and just pull the tall ones out and try to stop them from growing and getting, to seed. So there's a sweet potato field. You won't see any weeds in there. We go through and thoroughly weed them, and it actually looks really beautiful when you've got all that green, especially in brown California. But we grow 4 to 5 acres. Typically, this last year we did 3, and it was smaller for various reasons why we didn't grow as much. But we've got contour, which is a little bit challenging. In fact, once you get beyond just a gentle slope, the amount of labor involved is probably nearly 4 times as much. So if you're trying to grow on a hill, a lot of it's manual. You eliminate the tractor for some of the processes. So here we are, it's harvest time. We get our elementary kids involved and try to include them in whatever they can contribute. So we first remove the drip tape And I've tried several different harvest methods, and because of our soil, we have a lot of stones in our soil, and we have a variation of moisture content. So this tool that you can see there, it's actually a drip tape lifter. I just mounted that on a toolbar as well, and it goes underneath and pushes them up to the surface, and then you just grab the vines and pick them up and separate them, and it works really well. You have some coulters in front, and a coulter, if you don't know what a coulter is, the kids call it a pizza cutter. It's just a giant wheel, I think it's 26 inches, the one that we use. I did build this machine here as a potato harvester, and I used it one season, but I stopped using it, and David Overmiller's got it down at Fresno Adventist Academy now. But our soil conditions are so varying because of the slopes, and in this one big field we've got 5 springs, and so what I found was it would get underneath, and as you can see, it did a really nice job in some areas. Some areas there were so many rocks, the stones would fall between the bars and jam up the wheels that were feeding the belt over, and you'd have to stop and free it up and keep going. And then when we get into areas where the moisture content was too high, the dirt would just come over in a sheet. It wouldn't shake any of it loose, and it would jump off the back. And sometimes it would dump a big pile of it, and so instead of being easy to get them out, you'd end up with like this big pile and a whole bunch of them buried in there, and it was more work to get them out. So I reverted back to just using the drip tape lifters, and it's still labor intensive for us. We don't have very big fields. We don't have much growing area for it. So we have to do what we can. We can't use the type of harvester that they use commercially. This is the one here without the coulters on that works sufficient. But in the commercial growing, they'll use a big trailerized unit. In fact, this is kind of a smaller one compared with some of them. Some of them are as big as a semi-truck trailer, and they'll have all their crates there. They have a team of people lined up, and the digger will go underneath and take them up, shake the sand off, and then they have a team there sorting them, grading them, sizing them, and putting them into the appropriate bins. And then, of course, the forklift takes them off there, and they can do it very, very efficiently and without a lot of back-breaking work. But this is what you're aiming for with your plant. If you get 4 nice big sweet potato, you're doing really well. They don't always work out that way, but when you feed the potassium, it's more likely that you'll end up with that. I think we're doing well if we average, on a larger scale, if we average about 2 pounds per plant, but I think it's possible to get better than that. I'm still trying to adjust to get the optimum yield. You don't want them to be too big for marketing, because when they get too big, the customers don't want them. We get paid a premium price because ours taste better than any that you can buy in the supermarkets. And so we get $1.50 a pound for them, and wholesale, and then they sell them for about $2.39 a pound. So if they're too big, someone buys a potato this size, they're paying over $10 for it. So you don't want to get them too big. That not too many customers are willing to do that. So probably about a two-pound sweet potato is as big as you want to go. This particular variety is a Japanese one. It's got a purple skin and a white flesh. We've found that the 3 varieties that are common, at least in our western part of the country, there's what people call yams. And I get asked this question all the time, so I'll throw it out there. People say, what's the difference between yams and sweet potato? There is no difference. They're all sweet potato. In fact, they're not even yams. What they call yams are not yams. If you look it up, a yam is a South American root that's a really nice tasting root. I have never seen it for sale here. We have them in New Zealand. But when they introduced the orange-fleshed sweet potato in the United States, they wanted to differentiate it from the other sweet potato. So as a marketing name, they called it a yam. But legally, the boxes actually have to say sweet potato / yams. So they're all sweet potato. Now, the second variety that we grow mainly is a Hannah, is the supermarket name. The plant varieties that you buy are going to have different names than the supermarket names. Garnets, jewels are fairly common for the orange-fleshed ones. but the type of plants that will produce an orange flesh, there's quite a number of them, and they keep changing because as disease issues come up, they keep developing disease-resistant varieties, and so they change. So garnets are well and truly past. The one now that replaces a garnet is called a Diane. And same thing with jewels. We grow one that's called a Covington, and that's what is marketed as a jewel. The customers get used to a name, and the supermarkets don't want to change the name, so they keep the same name because the replacement varieties look the same. And for the white-fleshed ones, we grow a variety that's called, we just changed to one called Bonita. We used to grow one called O. Henry, but the Bonita is a much better one. Yes?
Do you notice a difference in the sweetness of the sweet potato with the variety, or is it more in the pure process?
Definitely there's a difference in taste and texture as well. The orange-fleshed ones are very sweet, and they're a softer texture. The Japanese, they're white, they're sweet, but they're more of a drier, maybe a little denser texture. And I like the Japanese more than I like the orange flesh, but if you grew up eating the orange fleshed ones, you probably like them more. We're actually growing a New Zealand variety now that is similar to a Japanese, but it's got a pink skin, and it's much nicer than the Japanese variety. And this year will be the first year I'll sell them. I don't know, it's amazing when you bake them, the sugar just flows out of them and caramelizes on the tray that you're baking them in. We call it a Northern Rose in New Zealand. I don't know what name I'm going to put on it yet for over here, but it was developed in New Zealand, and I like the growing habit of it. It has shorter vines, and so when you're harvesting, you don't these other varieties, they grow 9-foot long vines, and they cross several rows, and sometimes if they don't get cut properly, they can tangle, and you have to stop and make sure that they're not bunching up. So with this other variety, they only grow about this long. So if they were in the middle and they didn't get cut, they'd kind of get brushed past, and they're just nicer to work with. I think I saw another, yes. We harvest in October. We start October, and it pretty much takes us a month to harvest them. In a small garden? Yeah, just probably come in from the sides. If you've got a broad fork or just a regular fork, come in from the sides and dig in and lift up and just gradually come in, because you don't want, just like regular potatoes, you don't want to stab them. But once you loosen the soil up, you can usually grab the vine, and if they're big, they've got a bigger attachment and they're more likely to hang on. If they're small, they can, break off when you pull the vine. So loosen the soil, lift the vine, and then, separate them from that. You can see this bunch here. I taught a class to a gardening class for our local church, and they were really excited when they harvested and had these big, nice bunches of sweet potato. So after we've got them up a little bit in the ground, then we pick them up, and we typically will have half a dozen kids from the academy, and they just go along and pick them up and put them into little tubs and then dump them into a crate, and then we pick them up with forks, put the crates on the trailer, and take them through to the shed. And we've harvested probably the most, I think, was about 80 of those bins. And I'm not sure of the exact weight of the bins. I was told when we bought them that they would hold 1,000 pounds. I've never actually put them on a scale and weighed them, but I did sell a whole crate to David Overmill at Fresno Academy, and as they sold, they recorded how much they sold, and when they finished selling them, he told me they sold 700 pounds. But they do, when you fill the crate and you store them, they actually continue to breathe and sweat. So you'll see the level going down a little bit. They can lose 20% of their weight from just, moisture evaporation. So I haven't noticed them get sweeter, but there will be a bit of a difference when you cure them. And I'll talk to you a little bit now about the curing process. We just have an old metal shed there, and we put a furnace inside there. They need to be stored above 55 degrees. They're a tropical plant. They don't like cold. If they were stored in the 40s, they would probably after a month be starting to go very soft and rotten. So you want to keep them above 55. The ground temperature is actually 55 to 57 degrees. So if you have a root cellar, or maybe you could even bury a shipping container or something under the ground and put them inside and make sure you've got some air circulation. But keeping them above 55 degrees is important. They will last a long time. Commercially, they store them for up to a year, and they keep the humidity up. I think 70 or 80% humidity, and they store them, that long. And as long as they're at that temperature, they're not going to sprout. But if they get up into the upper 60s, into the 70s, they will start sprouting over a period of time. So we put them in the shed here. We don't have the ability to cool the shed. We only have the ability to warm it up. So I set the furnace at 57 degrees. And at night, when the temperatures drop into the 40s, then it turns on and warms up the shed and keeps it at that minimum temperature. But in the springtime, once we get past March and the days are in the 70s, our crates that are stacked inside there, when I take a top one off and I look inside, I can see them after, probably by April, they're all starting to, especially the top ones are sprouting. But now we're pretty much sold out before March, so we don't have issues with that. But we put them in the shed there, and to cure them, they need to be at about 85, 90 degrees for 3 days with about a 90% humidity ideally. The floor of our shed, this happened by, I was going to say by accident, but I think it was providence. When they poured the concrete, I noticed when I'm not sure, maybe it was before we got the roof on the shed or something, I noticed that the floor sloped to the middle, and so it could hold an inch and a half or so of water in the middle of the shed without it running off. So to cure them, I just flood the floor of the shed, and it holds that water, turn the temperature up, and it's got humidity, and that water's evaporating, and 3 days is all it takes to cure them at that temperature. If you don't cure them, they won't last as long. They'll go rotten sooner. But if you do cure them, they will be... What does curing do? It changes them inside somehow. It actually, if you left them at that temperature, so 3 days in cutting them off, if you left them for maybe over a week, maybe 10 days to 2 weeks, they would be sprouting. So somehow inside they are changing their structure to start producing sprouts, but you cut it off and then bring it down to the 55 to 60 degree range, and they're not going to sprout at that temperature, but it changes them. And if there's cuts on them, it heals the cuts. It kind of just dries them, and they kind of seal off. And so that's really beneficial, because you will cut some as you're harvesting. Yes? Yeah, by putting the water on the floor, the heat makes that water evaporate, and it makes the humidity higher. So the humidity helps them in the process of wanting to sprout. Yes, I see a hand here, and then as soon as you can after getting them out of the ground. Because it takes us a month to harvest, from the first ones to when they get cured, it's a month. They're stored there. They can wait, yes. And leave them in the crates, yeah. You can see the crates have gaps between the boards, and so air flows through them. It doesn't make any difference where they are, because the heat is uniform inside. Well, if you saw the picture of the front of the shed, it's got a sliding door. There's some gaps. It probably gets some natural airflow. The furnace, it blows air, so there is a bit of air movement. But I think that the main thing is that it stays evenly heated. I don't think you want an airtight situation. That might create some issues too. How to cure it? Okay. Since you are into gardening, you won't mind some dirt inside the house. So I would suggest go into your bathroom, and if you've got maybe a couple of boxes of them, or I don't know what volume you're going to grow, but if you can stack them in your bathroom, and then take your bathtub or some buckets or whatever of water, or turn the tap on so that it's dripping, and so that puts humidity, and then take a heater inside there, close the door, and put a little thermometer so you can know what the temperature is, and adjust your heater so it gets in that 85, 90, and just leave it for the 3 days, and it'll be fine. And you can shower in there too. That'll add to the humidity. So, yes, after that, then you store them at 55 degrees to 60 degrees. Now, if you don't have a place to do that, what my wife does, when I bring some home to her, and she doesn't want to use them right away, she'll put them underneath the kitchen sink, the cupboards there, and with the running water through the sink, it kind of cools. It's a little bit cooler there than other places of the house. So they seem to sit in there for a good month without any sprouting or issues. If your garage if the temperature stays above 55, it should be fine. But if your garage is getting down into the 40s, they will probably go bad. Maybe not immediately, but they will go bad after a month probably. But if they're kept at the right temperature, they will last for, if you can keep them in that temperature range, they'll last a year. But you have to have cooling in the summer because the heat will make them sprout. But even after they sprout, you can still eat them, but they're taking some of the nutrients out of there to put into the sprouts. I tell you what, I don't know what the time is. I haven't been watching the time. It is time 11:48. We're supposed to finish. Let me just finish the slide. We'll close. Anyone wants to go, they can go, and I'll be happy to answer questions. So what we do then, we wash them, and very simple. Farmers have to improvise and cut costs. We just took an old iron bathtub, put it on legs. We washed them in the bathtub, and then I bought off Craigslist it was a conveyor dryer from a print shop. They took screen printed T-shirts and put them through. I paid $200 for this conveyor. Put some forced air through there. They come out from that conveyor onto a table. They're not fully dry when they get there, so we mounted a fan above that blows some air down, and I've got a rotary table there, collection table. And then from there, we just pack them into the boxes, 30-pound boxes, and then stack them on a pallet, and then take them from there and deliver them to the stores. We have one main store that buys most of what we grow. We don't try to sell them to too many other stores because their volume is not high enough, and we sell out soon enough that we're able to keep up with the pace of this one store. We do have another store that we supply that's really close to them, but if we wanted to sell further, we could, and we'd run out much sooner. So, but then we'd have to have more workers and shifts, going on to wash and pack them. So we just go at a pace that works well for us. So let's have a word of prayer, and then I'll stay by for any questions. Loving Father in heaven, thank you for giving us this amazing plant, the sweet potato, and the nutrition that comes from it. Thank you that it has really amazing health benefits to us. We look around us and we have people close to us that are suffering from terrible diseases, cancer, and all kinds of things. And Lord, we want to do everything we can to help them with natural means that you ordained to help them heal. So, Father, as we grow, we don't want to be just growing thinking about dollars. We want to be growing thinking about the benefits to humanity and how we can continue the ministry of Jesus through the healing foods that we grow. So please, Lord, give us the opportunities to witness and to use our farms and gardens to glorify you, and ultimately, Lord, that there will be souls in the kingdom as a result of this work. Thank you, Father. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.